Welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show about short video games, games that respect your time. I am Reagan Kelly, and I'm joined by all my awesome co-hosts. We are reunited, and it feels so good. Laura Nash, how are you doing, Laura?
I'm very happy. We're having a little mini reunion here.
Yeah, it's been a little bit of time since we've been able to record all together because of so many exciting life events. I think our listeners already know about Nate Heininger's recent-ish life events. How are you doing, Nate? How are you and your family doing?
Oh, great. Yeah, I'm glad to be here with everybody. I've been spending a lot of time late nights playing this game. I got my own cheering section now, though she mostly just sleeps and cries, but I like to pretend that she's cheering me on.
Very cute. And Shane, you have a similar life event just recently, more recently.
Nearly identical. In fact, thanks for stealing my thunder by having the exact same, by having a baby right before me, Nate.
Yep.
But it's exactly a week and 1 day ago. So wow. I'm still extremely sleep deprived, and I've been playing this game in incredibly short bursts when I am awake and don't have my hands on an infant. So.
Well, I'm glad that we actually managed to get together to record under such duress. I just finished a move from San Jose to Denver, and I'm still in sort of temporary digs right now, and probably will be for another month almost or so. So sound quality may suffer a little bit. Apologies in advance. I'm doing my best with the odd setting.
Guys, we know it's unacceptable. Just let Reagan have this moment, these next few episodes. But, take your gripes to us and leave Reagan alone, okay?
I can take it, guys. I can take it. And I'm very happy that once we finally all got back together, we're talking about a game that we have been anticipating for so long and that turned out to be such a delight to play. So this week we're talking about Pyre, the third game, the most recent game from Supergiant. Our longtime listeners probably remember that we talked about Transistor, their previous game, way back in 2014. I actually went back and re-listened to some of that episode today, and that feels like such ancient history. That was episode 13 of The Short Game.
And I believe the game of the year for that year on our show.
Yeah. It was certainly my short game of the year. I think we ultimately landed on it as our official short game of 2014. The award that nobody cares about because nobody even knows that they receive it.
Hey, I mail them a trophy. No, I mail them a trophy every year, and only one of them have been returned to sender. So it's
actually Supergiant was incredibly gracious and thanked us in a tweet, Shane.
Oh, really?
Presumably one of their social media people.
Oh, I need to get back on Twitter more.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
Yeah, 2014 Shane needs to be back on Twitter.
Remembering. Get it together. That's embarrassing for you, Shane, because you know that they listen to every episode ever since then.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know. Well, we're going to praise them more on this episode. So
Greg Kasavin gave me a call just today and said, "Guys, when are you playing our game? It's been out for like almost a month now. Where's the episode, guys?"
We actually did have some of our listeners reach out and be like, "Are you not doing Pyre?" And so here we are. I'm really glad that we're talking about this game and that this game came out. Bad timing for us all to have live events because this is a much anticipated and spoilers. Pretty fantastic game. I'm excited for us to talk about it.
I think people that, when I see that Supergiant Games has a game coming, I know you pretty much know what you're going to get in terms of quality, and that level of quality is incredibly high. For fans of indie games, Supergiant is kind of like this, it's a known quantity. You're going to get really incredible world building that is built around these like incredible central story questions. And you're going to have this flexible, incredible gameplay that's incredibly customizable. You're going to have an incredible, beautifully orchestrated soundtrack
by Darren Korb.
Yes.
In every case.
What?
And there will be some kind of westerny things. We've talked about Transistor, but Bastion is also there. And I remember just the western twang in your voice from playing more than 5 minutes. Very glad that a little bit of that flavor's come through even now.
We've still never done an episode on Bastion, and that's got to be something that we go back to when we, have some dead time where awesome brand new short games aren't coming out constantly.
That time feels to be less and less now. I mean, it feels like this is a good time to be into games. We've been saying that for years, but it feels particularly heavy right now. I mean, we've got obviously this game, the Tacoma, which we're going to do at some point really soon.
Game, absolutely.
Yeah.
So why are we so excited about Pyre other than the pedigree?
Yeah. Well, I can say that the first time that I checked this game out was about a year and a half ago at what's that thing called? It's an event in San Francisco.
I'm excited about it because it's Wizard basketball and it rules.
Yeah, okay.
Enough about where we found out about it. It's Wizard basketball. It's an RPG with sports elements, and Wizards basketball.
I think it's a sports game with RPG elements. I really think that this is it's sports. It's a fantasy sports, and not in the world of like fantasy football, fantasy baseball. Shane corrected me when I said that the other night. I called it a fantasy sports game to someone, and like out of context, that just sounds like you're playing fantasy football. It's a sports game set in a fantasy realm.
Oh yeah,
heavy.
It's like FIFA.
Yeah.
I was not expecting to open a book and then in the game read a spell manual and start playing NBA jams. That was not what I thought was going to happen.
Yeah.
And it does about 10 minutes in.
It's a combo of a sports game and a visual novel interactive fiction game, all with the elements of an RPG all over it, which is, you see visual novel kind of mixed with RPG more commonly, but I can't think of a sports game mixed with interactive fiction or anything even close to that. I can't think of any other examples that hit what this game accomplishes.
What I think is interesting here is that, so the director, Greg Kasavin, says that they didn't set out to make a sports game. And in fact, he kind of, in most of the interviews, he expressed, and I think, I don't know why, but he expressed some surprise at how much everybody compares this to sports games. Because he says they didn't start out with that as the idea. They just started out with the idea of building a game with an ensemble cast. And if you look at their previous two games, Transistor and Bastion, they both have this sort of action RPG thing, and they've both got their own twist on it. And they're both telling an interesting story with sort of a mysterious world around it. And a lot of that carries right through into Pyre. But you can kind of see where, like, if you were to take the action combat of Transistor and think, how would we do this if we actually had a bunch of characters to control at once? You can really see a kind of a through line from the incredibly fun, but basically you're playing one character combat of Transistor down to something like Pyre. Simplify the action a lot, but give you more characters to control at a time, and suddenly you've got something that is essentially a sport.
Transistor's action was so intense that they had to let you pause and plan out every move. And this actually plays very similarly, but because I think they wanted to have this ability to have one-on-ones, they made it real time. You take that away, you have to simplify.
Well, I was actually shocked that you get to have a little bit of a RPG controlling other character sense, but you play as a distinct character yourself.
You're this kind of team manager, you're the reader.
Yeah.
That kind of ties
coach.
into the setting, which I thought was one of the most fantastically interesting parts of the game, was the overall world building and setting of the game.
Yeah, so let's kind of talk about, I think the best way to handle this, because it feels to me like there's two distinct parts of the game. There's like the plot and the story, which is awesome, and then there's the sport game that we've been kind of hinting at. And I think it would actually be more effective to explain the plot, so then we can explain why the NBA Jam game matters, why it matters. So let's start with the kind of like what the world is and why everything matters and who you are as the reader.
So a little mini spoiler alert here, then.
Well,
Well,
I'm very early in the game, so I'll say what I know, so that no one will get spoiled, and then you guys can correct me if I say something that's factually inaccurate because I haven't played as deeply. You start off as an exile from the Commonwealth, and you run across some people who rescue you, 3 folks, and then you kind of look inside of their caravan.
It's a wagon.
It's a wagon.
It's a Ford.
It's the band van. It's whatever you want to call it. And they say, "Oh, look, there's some books in the back. We saved your life. Can you read?" And you can choose whether you want to try to hide it from them. But it turns out reading is a crime. You open up this book in the back, and they tell you that you can perform a series of rites to get back, to be liberated. Then you do a demo of the first rite, which is the sport game. So your folks, your party is going to go on a road trip doing all of the rites. And that's kind of the main plot that's set in motion, that you're one of the few people capable of reading. You're going to control the party during the rites as your role as the reader, but a lot of the RPG elements are, introduced slowly. You're doing more and more rites as you go to do the series of 8, and you get more and more lore as you go. But that's the basic hook.
The setting is really important. You're in this world called the Downside, and the Downside is where the Commonwealth, which at least initially seems like this really nice, society. It tells you, it's based on the principles of mercy, and I don't remember what else, but it sounds like this very egalitarian, cosmopolitan place. And when somebody is not acceptable for the Downside, so treason or
for the Commonwealth,
or criminals, for the Commonwealth, they cast them down into the Downside, which it seems at first like it's unclear how it is related to the Commonwealth, but the Downside seems to be like completely separated from the Commonwealth, and it's a little unclear, but it could be a separate sort of plane or dimension, or it's a sort of a purgatory. You're in this place that is a sort of a almost apocalyptic wasteland of a place that is just where all the refuse from the good society is cast down.
To me, it sort of reminded me of the Forbidden Zone. Was that it in Superman, where they would throw people?
I don't know.
Zod was exiled into a floating prism in
Yes,
Superman
I think
2.
it is the Forbidden Zone.
I think it was the Forbidden Zone he was sent to. To me, that's what it seemed like.
Only less flat.
Well, can we talk about how exciting it is to play a game set in an apocalyptic wasteland that has color in it? We are not
it's so
stuck
beautiful
in a sea of brown and gray and terrible avocado green. We are in this beautiful, colorful stained glass window glowing. And everyone's talking about what a shithole it is, but it looks great.
I think it's only a shithole because everyone is there because they got exiled. Like, it's a lush, it's got tons of different biomes. There's like the frozen, all the RPG like video game worlds you'd want. There's like the lava area, the sea area, the deserts, the plains,
icy
everything.
area.
Icy area. It's all beautiful though. It just feels like just another world. And I think the only thing that sucks about it is that everyone who is there has been exiled from what's called the Commonwealth.
The only really concrete thing I think that was horrible about the Downside was the food. And that's enough. Don't get me wrong. If all I can eat is like weird slugs, get me out of there.
But there's, everyone, like, they say it's really hard for them to survive. And I think part of that is like, it'd be hard for anybody to, you just get dropped in a forest somewhere or whatever. Like, that's just going to be hard to survive. But there seems to be like a civilization down there. There's groups, there's like little stores.
There's Falcon Ron.
There's Falcon Ron. I want to talk about Falcon Ron all day.
We could save that for later.
The traveling merchant. But
there's adorable imps.
It's a really unique environment. And you get there, they cast you down the river, and you'd think you could just swim back up the river, but that doesn't seem to be the case.
It's a river of the spirit or something, I think. it describes, so it takes a while to sort of unravel its lore, and so we won't reveal too much of it before we talk about this, before we do a spoiler break. But it seems sort of absurd on the surface that these exiles have to play like fantasy basketball in order to free themselves from their exile. But there's this whole lore that's built up around this idea of the scribes. The Commonwealth has outlawed writing, but there are these scribes that were exiles in the downside who wrote the Book of Rites, and the Book of Rites is what you read to be able to do these rites that are the kind of game, the I guess the combat system or the sports game aspect of the game, and it's these sort of mystical rites by these long dead, sort of revered as gods scribes that allow you to ascend back to the Commonwealth. And something that kind of struck me about this element of it, this idea of like the exile and being able to earn your freedom through these mystical rites or sports games, basically. It actually kind of put me off at first a little bit. When I first heard the description of the game, I thought that sounds a little bit disjointed. Something that kind of put me off about some of Supergiant's past games. The world of Transistor or the world of Bastion are a little bit not concrete and a little bit, they're mysterious, but they also have a kind of a heightened fantastical element to them, and that's here too. But it goes a lot deeper than at least I felt like it did in either of their previous two games. Like, without going into spoilers at this point,
I left every one of those games wanting to know more about the world. And
right.
In this one of the good things about it is everything you learn, and this is kind of part of the hypertext UI of the game, everything you learn, you'll never forget, because not only do you have the classic kind of book of lore where you're unlocking pages, but every piece of writing in the game has this hypertext on it. And so if you see a name and you highlight it, you'll be able to, get a quick reminder of like what is this person? Where do they come from? What are their goals? Maybe a quote from them.
I love that.
So what I think is really interesting about this too, we keep talking about it's a sports game but we're spending all this time on the plot because the sports element, like the actual gameplay when you're playing the game, the rights, I think that maybe ultimately is about a third of the game time, maybe even a quarter of it. The vast majority of this game is consuming the plot and the characters and interactions with the characters. It all serves the purpose of leading you to these games. So the games are a central focus on it, but actual like gameplay time, I felt like was mostly reading the conversations or history or lore or whatever, and that's why it almost felt like a interactive fiction game or a visual novel game that had a sports element. When you walk away from the game, you'll probably feel like the rights were the focus on it, and that's because that's the really fun part of the game. It is an action game, and we're going to talk about that here in a moment, but like the majority of the time is learning about the world. And that's why I think, unlike a game like Transistor, which is almost all action and then the lore comes at you, through that, this is more like the lore is the core of the game and then the action is like the part that moves it forward.
I think that you're right, there's definitely the same focus. Like the previous games have kept you in the action constantly and have sort of drip fed the story. This one lets you interact with the story more or less, kind of depending on your preference, really. About half of the story is in these optional things, like locations that you can go to that have some interaction with a character, or invitations from a character sitting in the wagon, which is a big portion of the UI of the game. There's the black wagon, this sort of special wagon.
I can't imagine anyone playing this game and skipping the people requesting to talk to you. I mean, maybe if you want to just like plow through it and get to the rights, but like I don't know. Even when I felt like I just want to move forward, I was like, I can't not talk to this person. Like,
yeah, the characters are all so extremely interesting, and all the dialogue is like actually really well written, or at least I thought so. I really enjoyed every minute of every opportunity I could get to talk to them.
But if somebody did disagree, they could skip it. I think that's an important thing to note.
True.
The gameplay on its own is fun enough that if you're just, in fact, you could just start the game in 2-player. And I think this is going to be a really fun multiplayer game. I really hope that they get online play going for it, which right now it's just couch competitive, kind of 1v1.
Mm-hmm. Or you can play against an AI. It's got an option to play versus the computer, which is nice because you can set up matches with your own custom difficulty, and you can build teams from people that might not have been on teams with each other before, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and the AI is good. I mean, and you can increase it. You can get beat by these guys no matter how much you're actually trying to win. So especially if you ramp up the difficulty. Some sports games, it doesn't always feel like that. But this one, I think they spent a lot of time tuning the AI to actually utilize the abilities and stuff. And again, we'll get into that. But I think the UI and how they tell the story, I think, Shane, you were starting to get into that, is really interesting. And it's actually similar to a game that at least the two of us, and to a degree, Reagan, though not as much, got really into.
Yes.
Long time listeners of this show.
And so when I saw the UI for this game, I was immediately like, oh, nice! It has a Destiny cursor.
As a quick side note, I was listening today to our episode on Transistor, and Nate was like, "Yeah, I got an alpha for this game, Destiny. I haven't tried it yet. I don't know if I'm gonna like it." I was like, "Oh,
that's funny. Oh
Nate.
No, he was so naive, so young, so naive."
So the Destiny cursor is, I think, the most advanced piece of console RPG user interface that has ever existed. I've ever played on a console, which is not that many. I don't play a lot of console RPGs, but I love the Destiny cursor because it's just so perfect. It has this sort of to not call it. I don't like calling it the Destiny cursor because it's starting to show up everywhere else. But to come up with a name for it, I now think of it sort of as the sticky circle. The sticky circle cursor.
Whoa, please try not to. If you can think of it something less technical.
There's got to be a name for it.
No, there's an official name for it. I should know this as someone who does UI.
I'm afraid to Google sticky circle. I don't know how that would.
There's a term for it that I will find after I leave for the spoiler grape and text to you guys. But there is a real name of it.
I would love to see someone analyze it and see where it's popping up, because I love it on consoles, and it has, just like in Destiny, it has this sort of halo that kind of sticks to interactive objects. And the nice thing about it on console is, like, the circle kind of gives, because it's an empty circle, it kind of gives you the illusion that nothing is obscured behind it, unlike with a exact point cursor, and it kind of sticks to any edge or something, and if you can use it to pick up and drop stuff and move it around and change, select boxes.
And unlike a traditional cursor, it's large enough to see from your couch.
Yes. And so it's easy enough to control with a joystick, which, I don't know, it's nice. I like it.
Yeah, as someone who increases the size of their mouse even on their laptop, which you're sitting like 10 inches away from, I appreciate the giant circle on the screen as my as my cursor.
So I finally remember the name of them. It's a version of the radial menu that, like, the little circle thing that comes from the 80s, but they've actually made it work as opposed to the 80s version, which does not work.
I like sticky circle.
Sticky circle.
You heard it here first, folks. Shane, put that next year on your resume.
All right, Shane Kelly invented the sticky circle.
They also call it a half pie in some variations.
Oh, I like that. Sticky pie?
Yeah.
But it is effective because it lets you either, like, someone's talking to you, and as Shane was talking about before, like, words will be highlighted that you can curse over, or you can just hit X and just keep moving through the text. You get to decide what you focus on. And there's a lot of times, early on, you see a name for the first time, you'll hover over it, you get a little bit of a, backstory. But then the next time, it's always there for you if you want it. Like, oh, who is that?
Yeah.
Who is that person?
And that's the thing.
Again?
You don't really have to worry about missing stuff, because so much of the game is done in this really good hypertext. So, like, if you're just I just sat down and I want to get through this conversation. I want to play some 3-on-3 wizard ball. I just hold down the square button and I'm like, zoop, I'm there.
Yeah, and I feel like this is unlike most of these games that are like an RPG, but you have choices. This also felt like an interactive fiction game where like I really felt that the choices I made in the fiction actually had outcomes, true like different changes to the story, both to the rites, who you'd be playing in the rites, but also big picture story. So you could blow through it, but you may accidentally make a decision that you will regret later. It really wants you to care about the world and gives you all the tools that you would need to actually care about the world.
So as you guys got a lot further in the story than I did, I always find when I'm playing interactive fiction that the game might guide me to either really strongly roleplay and protect my characters, regardless of how easy or hard the game would make it, or the game was kind of asking me to max min, to really worry about survival and be a little more callous towards the characters and more protective of getting through the game or succeeding. How does the game balance that in this one?
So this game does something that I think is really, really unusual and smart, specifically with this, and that's that it really hammers home early on that, and in all of the sort of in-game text and everything, that winning is sort of not everything in this game. You can lose a right, and you can even choose to throw a right. There's lots of characters who you are playing against in these rights who are trying just as hard as all of your characters are to earn their freedom, and sometimes winning isn't the right thing to do, or it might not feel like the right thing to do, and it always gives you the choice to lose a right and the game will continue. And that includes some of the like liberation rights later on, where you can choose at any point to basically, you might just lose a right, but you can also choose to lose rights intentionally and let other characters kind of get out instead. And that gives you this incredible sort of possibility space. There's probably, if you count every possible combination of who is liberated and who isn't, there's probably dozens, maybe hundreds of possible endings altogether.
So you talk about how you can throw games, and I don't think that's a feature that many people would want. Like, technically any game it's possible to throw. You can take Mario and walk him over and just walk right into the first Goomba and wahoo, yeah, it's me, dead. But why would you do that? So this game, the story and the gameplay work really well together I felt like it was a two-pronged attack on like breaking my addiction to winning in this sort of game, right? To see that it can be as interesting to play around and experiment and lose. And so there, early on, like when you start off, you start off in this kind of doing a round of these rites, not really having read the book and understood yet what they're about. And you're competing against, that they're about liberation, but you're competing against all these other different characters and learning a little bit about them. And as the game goes on, you and all the players on your team start to have essentially relationships with each other and with the opponents. And because this is a game where it's not people trying to kill each other, win or lose, those relationships and those stories are going to go on. And there's like some help text that I thought I really liked. If you're about to try and restart a match, like you're about to lose and you're going to hit restart, it warns you, the story will continue. You need but see it through. And when I got to that at the first liberation rite, I was like, you know what? I'm going to see it through. This game wants me to see it through. And I lost, and I went on a losing streak in this game. And some of the most interesting stuff that happened in the game happened because I lost compared to the stuff that happened because I won.
And For those who can't see, Nate, during half of that piece, was shaking his head no back and forth with a look of shame on his face.
Shame. I didn't even know there was a way to restart a rite. Win or lose, it is a part of it. And so for those of you out there who are about to lose a rite and you restart it, Reagan, that is counter to the point. I didn't even know there was a text that tells you that, but I'm telling you now, if you losing a rite is as eventful as winning a rite, so you should play it through.
I will also say though that like there's not really a wrong way to play this game. Shane said this game helps to break your addiction to winning. I have
fun.
I have that addiction.
Nate is accusing us of having the wrong kind of fun, guys.
And
the wrong kind of fun playing
correction.
Pyre.
He's accusing Reagan of having the wrong kind of fun.
And
I did that several times. I restarted several rites because I was losing them, and the game is fine. If that's how you want to play. If you can't stand the idea of losing one of the matches, I intentionally did lose one of them. But like, if you can't stand the thought of losing the match, you don't have to. And it's fine.
I'll say one thing. The developers put it in there. Obviously, they want you to be able to do that. I would like to think it's more like, I had some sort of life crisis in the middle of this one, and I lost it because I had to, leave my controller running to go and provide CPR.
It's there for life or death
It's the
situation.
CPR button.
Yeah.
You have to sign off on
I
that.
don't want to lose, but
If the Starbucks across the street is on fire,
My baby started screaming, and I just forgot to hit pause.
yeah, that's why that's there. Not because you just can't stand to lose.
Hey, all right.
No, I'm mostly joking, but I do think it's an interesting element. Like I think I've been the one to say like sports game 100 times, but like I love baseball games, but there's never been a game ever that has like made me even for a moment consider wanting to not win. And like throwing a game for a story purpose, I mean, where else? Like that is an experience. I mean, there's nothing else that's like that.
Yeah, it's really neat.
That is counter to what sports games want you to try to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I can't think of another game that's trying to enforce a community where you're trying to play people who you might like. Usually that's saved for the end, like Undertale. Like you might not.
Yeah.
You're not trying to. For people who haven't played, like you can play that game and not murder your way through it. You can try to beat up people and get through, but that's clearly the way to play through that game. It's not as if you have a choice to lose or win. You always have to win in Undertale. There's just different ways of winning.
Well, and with that, like, I don't think it's totally unheard of to have games where it's like to kill or not to kill. Like you're making the moral choice. Like that, while interesting, is relatively common at this point. But like,
it's not common. Like Undertale is famous for a reason. Like there's not that many games that have that degree of choice in terms of how you reach your ending or play your game. And this has it. This has that as least as much.
Yeah, I agree. I guess I'm saying that like moral decisions are becoming more and more common, like whether you're going to feel like a good person or not when you make a decision. But I can't think of any other game that has had a straight up like game in the middle of it that has incentivized you to, or not even incentivized, because you don't necessarily get anything better by throwing the game, but the feeling of it would be best if I lost this game for a AI character, not you as the player, because you as the player don't gain anything by throwing this match. It is purely a story decision. And while I never did that, like the stars, no pun intended,
technically
did not
you do gain something, even if you lose a match. You gain inspiration, which makes experience points, magnifies the experience points later.
But I guess that's true, but that's like a balancing thing to keep it where like so you level up no matter what. But like for the player to give up anything that you as a player are trying to accomplish to let like a story element go forward rather than your goals as a player is unique, and I think that's one of the really one of the big accomplishments of this game that gives you a feeling that no other game that I've experienced gives you. And I never had it line up like that for me. Like, for the most part, almost every time I played every match to win, but I know that there were other ones that the way it lined up, like with what you're talking about, Shane, like I think I probably would have thrown the match too if I had gotten that set of circumstances. The way I ended up playing most of the time, I felt like it was more justified for my characters to win than the other characters. But that was something I had to think about, which, like, what other sports type game do I have to think, like, is it the right thing for my team to win? Like, you don't go into the Super Bowl like, well, morally, the other team, they really worked harder for this than I did,
It's pretty hard to think of another game where losing does not equal death, or where the game isn't optimized to only continue if you win, or losing doesn't sincerely, it's not like you have to win 7 out of 10. If losing does not equal instant death, you still have to win. There's severe consequences, or your character's nerfed, or like a lot of times losing is so penalized or even ends your game that it's hard to rethink, to kind of break your brain and think about losing as a choice.
Most of the matches don't even have a significant impact on the story. Many of them are just introducing you to characters, or furthering kind of animosity or friendship between you and another character.
I want to get into talking about sort of the details of the rites, and also just sort of like the structure of the tournament, how one rite kind of goes into the next. But before we dive off fully onto that, we hadn't really completely talked about just how awesome this game looks and sounds, and I just wanted to spend a couple seconds talking about that. Like, guys, thank God for Darren Korb. Like, every soundtrack that he has done is fantastic. Every Supergiant soundtrack is by him, and this one might be my favorite of all of them. I mean, Transistor has an amazing soundtrack, but like this one has some songs that have this sort of like folksy, vibe to them. Others, it still holds that feel while mixing in some electronic stuff. Like it's really long. Like, you download this soundtrack and it's got like, I forget, but it's like certainly more than like 50 tracks. Like, it's a lot of music composed for this game.
Every character has a unique song, and every team that you come up against has a unique hymn with full lyrics that is sung while you fight them in a liberation rite.
Yeah, it does thematic music very, very well. Like, you'll get to the point where you'll hear a sound, like a song, and you kind of know what character might be coming up. They do it really well with that. I think it's composed to the degree that like a full, if not more than like a full movie soundtrack might. And it's on Spotify. I've been listening to it since the game came out. It's fantastic. We put it on, like, we had a bunch of because we have a new baby in the house, we have family over constantly, and so we just play music in the background. And I was playing that soundtrack the other day, and it just fit. It's such good music that like it just fits anywhere too. It's beautiful.
Yeah. And Shane mentioned the lyrics. Like, that's something that if I had one complaint about the soundtrack, it's that some of the songs, the lyrics are a little, I don't know, I thought that they felt a little goofy in some circumstances, but even then, like, it's still amusing for you to be playing these rites and have a song come in that's essentially, singing about the teams. It's really...
Well, and because everything Supergiant does serves a purpose and is part of the world, a major character that you interact with is called the minstrel, or the lone minstrel, and he kind of guides you around the world. It's supposed to be him that's singing, and he is the lone minstrel, and it's actually Darren Korb singing too. So it's actually, it's not just like out of nowhere like a song comes on. They set up that he's going to be the one singing the song, and then the song is about
I love it.
What's happening.
I really loved it.
So I already mentioned I was excited for a pink dystopia, or at least just a colorful one. But I've mentioned this on the podcast once or twice before. I really like concept art from animation, and I think that the art is, if not inspired by, very similar to a guy called Eyvind Earle, who was the main designer for Sleeping Beauty. Reagan and I went to the Disney Family Museum when I visited him. Yay. Thank you for letting me visit you. They had a big exhibit of his landscape paintings, and what they have in common is there's all this color and all this texture, and it's still completely flat. He puts like a million trees on, and they're in these crazy like bulbous shapes, and there's so much color and pattern in them, but it's still two-dimensional. And I think it's kind of, I mentioned stained glass, but it's that same kind of, it's not like everything is just glazed in a single color. Every hill has a slightly different pattern or model just to make it look like it's visually distinct, but it's still totally two-dimensional. I'll put a couple of the paintings in the show notes, but he's one of the only people I've seen with this art style, and I loved seeing something inspired by it show up, or at least that looked to me to be inspired by it, show up in.
Yeah, that was my first thought too. I immediately thought of his work, and if you're not familiar with Eyvind Earle, you probably are familiar with Disney's Sleeping Beauty.
He did Maleficent.
I know,
well,
like
the coloring of her.
Yeah, the coloring and the backgrounds in that movie are astonishing looking, and that's the kind of visuals that this has. It has this feeling of like a beautiful old Disney production. But also modern. You know, there's a lot of things about it that don't have that exact feel. I'd say the character design feels a little bit more fresh. It's very detailed, very expressive, cool looking silhouettes.
It's less film or TV and more like it's taking advantage of the glow of your TV screen. So it's like the color on those, which is already, using color very well, but adding that glow that you don't get in old Disney, like that, just the light is really good in these.
But what we're not talking about is what the actual subject matter of this location art in this game is, which is the entire landscape of the downside has been transformed by these incredible dead star titans that are just, these like enormous creatures that like litter the landscape, that are all have been killed in some way by one of the scribes. Really incredible. High fantasy. I think the really high fantasy, incredible setting sells the fantastical elements of this game better than almost any other part of it.
Yeah, and if we're gonna, if I can throw out one more sort of comparison, which I know are only so helpful if you know the thing that we're talking about, but it kind of reminded me of some of the Drinkbox games, Severed and Guacamelee. Like, I thought the colors were pretty similar. It felt kind of like I felt like you could zoom in on one of the worlds and play through Severed in this map. Maybe a little more saturated and a lot more colorful, but like it felt very similar to that as well.
I could see that too, yeah. Particularly the way they use color. It's really, yeah.
And one last thing on the sound that I just have to, it made me laugh every time, and I loved it. Is so there every time you talk to a character, it's all in text, but they all have a voice, and it's similar to like, I don't know, in like an RTS game, you know how you'd like click on a creature or whatever, and it'd be like zubba dubba dubba.
Yeah, there's quite a lot. To me, I think it was the most similar to like maybe the language in The Sims or something like that.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of fully voiced dialogue, but and every character has a unique voice recorded by a different, very talented voice, and I think actually in this case, extremely talented voice actor or actress. But it's all this kind of Latinate, pseudo-invented language that's the language of the Commonwealth, so that they can get away with a lesser amount of recorded dialogue. But it's really well used.
Yeah. And clearly the voice actors they're given like, okay, you're going to do like a 3-second soundbite that covers, we're about to throw like 10 lines where you're very excited. So you only have 3 seconds to make like this, sort of gibberish that sounds very excited.
There are certain words that come up again and again, like ligeratus, that's the reader. Mm-hmm. And a few other things like that. But
yeah, I think they probably did come up with like a vocabulary for this.
I read a post on Steam from one of the developers. He did write like a whole
I'm sure
thing about how he created the special language.
One thing that I don't get, though, and this comes up in a lot of situations like this, is they have this language, and everything is to serve the world as it is. Then why are the minstrels' songs in English?
Because you only speak English. Like, they're not going to... Well, actually...
Because you're the reader, and only readers get to speak English, and don't worry about it.
Actually,
why
that's
does
a
the
totally
voice
good
speak
point,
English?
because, Laura, that's a totally good point. There's one moment in this game where one of the voice actors speaks to you in English, and it's when one reader is speaking to another reader psychically. So, like, I think in the context of the game, like, English is like the language of the readers. And you notice the book is also in English, of course.
Yes, the book is in English.
Yeah. So I think there's a sort of an in-game... This game does a great job with a sort of diegesis of stuff,
Yeah, maybe.
I think it's a thing. So, I feel like we can't let this episode go without actually talking a little bit about the rules of the rites, the actual sport. How does it work? And we don't need to go into tons of detail here, but there are some things that I wanted to talk about it that I think are really clever and fun. I mean, it keeps it very simple. This is 3-on-3 sport ball, This is 3-on-3, like, I don't know what you'd call this. I think it sort of plays... in my limited understanding of sports, so take that for what you will. It plays a little bit kind of like basketball, a little bit like hockey.
Yeah, I think it's like basketball and reverse ultimate frisbee. So in ultimate frisbee, if you have the frisbee, you can't move and everyone else can move. In this game, if you the only person who can move is the person who has, the sports ball. And then kind of like rugby too.
Actually, it's not just the person who has the ball who can move. If none of your team has the ball, you can choose which one of them to move. And if one of your teammates does get the ball, whichever one of them has the ball moves, which keeps it really simple. A problem that I often had with sports games, and I have not played a ton of sports games, but back many years ago when I was a bit younger and would play literally anything I could get my hands on, and sports games were, we're talking about like the height of like Maddens and things like this. I just found sports games very confusing because you have this very large team and it was sometimes not obvious which character or player rather you're controlling. And honestly, sports games just never fully clicked for me. I just didn't get how to play them on a pretty fundamental level. Part of that was that I was young, but really they just confused me. Whereas this is really, really clear and simple. The sports games that I have really enjoyed, are things like tennis games where you've only got one character. Well, you have 3, but it keeps it really clear as to like how to move around and control your team. It's you're never trying to like figure out how to issue controls to multiple players at a time. You're always only controlling one player.
Yeah, the complexity though comes from the fact that you have 3 characters, but they are all distinctly unique. There is not one character that really plays at all like another character. There's maybe some tiny similarities if their race is the same. We haven't really touched on that, but there's a lot of different races in this game. But one character can fly. One character can self-implode. One character can cast like a little tree to block an area. They are all very unique, and so a lot of the skill to the game, to me at least, came from learning how to maximize the character's abilities. And then the simplicity of it is that you're only playing at any given moment one of them at a time.
And each of them has a few main actions, so it keeps the actual things that, your verbs in the game pretty simple. While you're controlling a character, all of them have the option to pass the ball, or if you don't have the ball, to just sort of pass control, so you're switching which character you're controlling at a time. And that can happen really quickly at any distance. You can pass from one end of the field to the other with essentially no chance of an interception. The ball goes from one person to the other almost instantly. So you can pass at any time to switch characters. And then each character also has an offensive action. So each character has a kind of an aura that surrounds them, and its size is based on their stats. But basically, if a character with a larger aura bumps into a character with a smaller aura, they get banished to timeout for a moment. But the character with the ball has no aura whatsoever. They're vulnerable. So each character has an offensive move, which mostly sort of throws their aura at another character. Each character has a dash that works a little differently for different characters and different speeds, that sort of thing. And each character has a kind of a jump or fly action. Depending on the character, it might just be a quick little hop to kind of leap over another character, or it might be like a teleport halfway across the map. And all of those are pretty consistent, but what each one of those actions means, like each character's jump or fly action, is totally different. Each character's option for dashing works a little bit different at different speeds. Everybody has a different level of stamina that kind of gates how much you can use these actions. So it keeps the actions really simple, but each character, those 4 actions mean totally different things. Mm-hmm. And it really rewards you kind of experimenting with and playing with each of the characters to try and get a sense of how to use them.
And then the RPG element is, as you level up, as completing rites, win or lose, you're going to get inspiration, which is another word for experience in this game. It unlocks new masteries, which are a skill tree. You'll recognize it if you've ever played an RPG. And also you unlock or you earn different talismans that let you, they can be real simple, like +8 to quickness, or they can alter an ability or give a new ability. So you can sort of, not only are you learning the characters, you're also advancing them in a way that fits your play style, and they become stronger and faster and better.
If I can talk a little bit more about how customizable the game is in that way, you can level up any of these different elements that Nate just described, but you can customize the way that the game plays as well, in a way that's really similar to something that Transistor had, where you could put on these limiters that made the game harder and in exchange get more experience. This game repeats that with these constellations that you can kind of include or not include in the ritual. And with those, I really feel like that is an incredible way to add a difficulty slider to your game for people that really want to kind of dynamically pick and choose how hard a certain encounter might or might not be. So you can turn them all, if you turn them all off the whole game, you're going to steamroll every opponent probably, and you're going to, but you're not going to level up very far with any of your characters. But if you turn more of them on, you can pick and choose until you get a feel, having that little bit of control over how the enemies behave. I really like that.
Yeah, and again, because everything serves a purpose, there are times for story reasons. I don't know if you guys ran into this as much, but because it seems to be very specific, but there was one time I had a very distinct story purpose for turning on one of the difficulty sliders, and
that was great.
It had
what you're talking about.
Yeah, it had a pretty intense effect.
I should mention all of this is on top of the normal easy, medium, hard. This game has.
So another really important thing about this that plays into both the story and how the rites play out is that, we mentioned at the top that these rites are about trying to send your people home, try to liberate people from the downside and send them back to the Commonwealth. And so throughout the game, there are certain rites that you get to play out where, ultimately, if you win, somebody, win or lose, somebody is going to ascend from the downside back to the Commonwealth. And that's both really good from a story perspective, although there's a sort of bittersweetness to that. You want your friends these characters that you've built relationships with over the game to go home. This is what they all are fighting for. But it also means that they're gone from the story, essentially. And so you might miss them. I mean, I know I did for some of them.
Oh man, it was such a bummer. I felt so sad letting some of these guys. It was one of the hardest decisions in this game for me was who to let go.
But there's also a really important gameplay aspect to that too, because maybe the character that you like the best, maybe you really, really like Jodariel, the woman who saves you in the first scene.
Jodie.
Yeah, and she is a great character in the story, and she's also an absolute beast in the rites. She's really powerful. And if you've kind of built your gameplay in the rites around using Jodariel, and then you liberate her, then you've got to figure out a different play style that uses the characters you still have. And I loved that because it really, really encouraged me to try characters that I might have otherwise. So it gives you a big cast. If you are, if you're playing this game right, you're playing with all of them, trying to level them up evenly, so that when you do liberate your friends, you're not left with a team of people that you have, put 5 experience points into. Mm-hmm. And I really, really liked that about it, because there are some characters that on the surface, if you haven't played a ton of rites with them yet, they seem really weird and difficult to use. And then once you get it, they're really cool and interesting. There's so much variety there.
Yeah, I don't think there's actually anyone who's any better than anyone else. I think they did a great job of making every character very, very valuable and worthwhile as playing.
It's incredibly balanced.
Yeah, so, but you're right. I mean, I had what I considered my dream team. It was Hedwyn, Jodariel, and Tizo, and I could just slay with them. But, that team started getting smaller, and I had to learn other ways, and I just felt so bad. But also, to the point at the beginning about how, you feel, the story, you are affected by how you feel, and maybe you'll win or lose dependent on the story. I felt good letting these guys go. I made some liberation decisions that I knew were going to negatively affect my gameplay, because I was really good with a couple of them. But I also wanted that character to be free.
Yes.
So it was sad, but it was also kind of bittersweet.
Something story-wise that I really, really love about that, and I don't think this is too much of a spoiler, when you liberate each character, not too long afterwards, in the course of the story, you get a letter back from them, that just sort of tells you a little bit about how they're holding up now that they've escaped back to the Commonwealth. And I loved those. I thought they were
everyone
so
gets
good.
+1 hope whenever you get that letter back, which is so nice. But the thing that I really have to stress about the rites is that they are so much fun. I loved playing the rites.
Definitely.
I just when I finished the game, I went back and you can just play just play the rites as an option from the main menu. I went back and was playing more of them. It's just a fun game. And so
you're talking about just doing the versus mode.
Just the versus mode. It's worth it. And I'm sad there's not online play, because I love couch versus games. I've played hundreds of hours of Towerfall, and I want to do the same with this game. It's just such a fun game. So it sticks out, even though it is a smaller part of the overall gameplay. I loved playing the rites, and in some of them, because I do not cheat like Reagan did, I got really, really stressed. And on a really important one, I won with 3 health left on my Pyre, and it was I was standing. I was so stressed.
They
about
are sweaty, man. Some of those rites are really tense. I love them.
But they only take about maybe 5 minutes at the most for a game to run from start to finish, if not short. I mean, I had one game that I think I finished in 45 seconds, because you just have to dunk on them, depending on who you're playing as, 3 to 5 times usually. So if you just get the ball and score really quick, you can finish a whole rite in under a minute. Or it can be a stressful back and forth, game that takes a lot longer. But They're quick.
I had one rite where both my characters and their characters had some kind of one of the talismans gives you an option to, when you dunk on the opponent's pyre, it reignites yours somewhat. And I had also turned on some of the options, the sort of constellations, so that they had a lot more fire on their pyre than I did. And that particular rite got so tense. It was back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And, they would dunk my pyre down to practically nothing. And then I would build it back up by dunking on them. And, oh man, most of these games go about 5 minutes, but they can get really nuts.
Can I say one thing about the pyres themselves? Every dunk for every character has multiple perfect, awesome animations where your character just literally throws themselves into the opponent's flame and is consumed. And the characters are all wearing these intense robes and masks, right? And the animations for them are all so good. So good.
So good.
The way that Joe Dariel just sort of creeps forward, like Joe Dariel is huge but slow as hell, and she walks forward with this like tiptoe creep, holding this book out in front of her.
Yeah.
It's so, some of the animation is incredible.
I built a talisman, though, that had +8 quickness and gave it to Joe Dariel. And so I was like kind of a fast Joe Dariel. It was awesome. I have to throw this out now because I think this is perfect. I put out on Twitter the other day, like, what do people think of Pyre? And someone wrote back, it said, religion, criminals, and monster dunks. What's not to love?
Monster dunks.
That was at PostButtWave. Great Twitter handle.
Incredible.
Monster dunks. Both literally, because they're kind of monsters, and figuratively. I mean, this game...
Could that be the sequel? Can we get Pyre 2, Monster Dunks?
It is a satisfying feeling when you... Especially with someone like Joe Dariel, who is slower, so you have to get all the way to the other side of the field and, get into their pyre. You can also throw the orb, which is a little less...
That's a risky move.
It is. It's a little less satisfying because it's not a monster dunk, but it actually does serve a really good purpose. Is when you do monster dunk, that character is banished for the next round. But if you throw it, they stay in. So if you can pull it off, it's worthwhile.
So I know that we're all eager to talk about some of the, who we liberated and...
No, sorry. I have one thing I want to do before the spoiler break, because I want to have everybody together. All right, so one of my favorite ways... I just want to throw one more thing about the game. One of my favorite ways that it was customizable. We talked about so many ways that you can customize your gameplay in this really natural way within this, that becomes a part of the story. But the best customization that they offered is there's this adorable good dog character named Rookie Greentail, and he's such a good boy. And at first I wasn't sure I liked him or not, but he came to me in the Black Wagon and he asked me, does my mustache make me look disreputable? And I said to Rookie Greentail, yes, because he has a mustache that much resembles the mustache on my good brother, good brother Reagan Kelly.
How could you shave that precious boy? What did you do?
That precious boy that looks
Reagan.
like Reagan.
He came to me, and he asked if the mustache made him look disreputable, and I told that good dog, yes, it does. And he shaved it off.
Did he? Oh,
yes, he did. He removes the mustache.
That's funny.
I cannot live with this, Shade. This shall not stand. How could you shave that good boy? He looked so proud of his mustache.
It does
if you shaved Reagan.
When he was sent home in glory, Reagan.
It is identical to Reagan's current mustache. You're right.
Oh, no. Listeners, I work from home and I only interact with people and things like podcasts. I live in a podcast hole, and so because of that, I've been able to disregard all haters and grow a magnificent mustache.
A disreputable mustache in the end.
Listeners, tell us what you think about Rookie Greentail's mustache.
Rookie looked awesome. He's a good dog. I love him.
If you think Reagan's mustache makes him look disreputable, please reach out to us at _shortgame.
I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. Well, I guess that's probably as good a place as any for us to break for our spoiler break.
I want to tease one thing more that we've left out in this entire conversation for a purpose. There is a story element that we're not talking about. A very deep story element that carries much of the game. So we're going to talk about that and more on after the spoiler break, but it is as much. We've already been talking about how deep and intense this game is as far as the lore. We haven't even touched on a major part of it. So if this game already sounds fun to you, just wait, because there's even more.
Or just go play this game. Like, this game is
that's
super
what I mean.
Good.
Yeah.
I loved it. I absolutely love this game. So, God, 2017, our Game of the Year pick is going to be so hard to make. So hard.
It is. I got to get the mailing addresses of all these companies to send them trophies. Maybe we'll just do a, just everybody wins. Let's stop ranking. What does that even mean anymore?
But somehow the person without any life events didn't finish the game, so I'm going to get off so I don't spoil myself, because I will be playing a lot of this in the future.
Lori, I was thinking, you keep saying you didn't have any life events, and while that's true currently, we all just went to Chicago for your wedding. You just did your life event, a few months before ours, all stacked on top of each other. So
you're not allowed to have
I'm
another one for a while.
Yeah, so let's...
Eventually I'll go on a honeymoon.
All right.
Fair enough.
Ladies and gentlemen, here it is, your spoiler break.
So the part that we were leaving out, assuming you've played the game, we're going to be rehashing that. But if for some reason you're still listening and you have not played the game, slowly but surely what develops is a sort of mysterious character by the name of Sandalwood, or at least that's all you know about him, is sort of the mysterious benefactor of your being in the rites at all. And you slowly start to learn that he is planning a revolution in the Commonwealth. And he'll be doing that by using the fame and fortune that the winners of the rites get when they return to the Commonwealth. So as the story develops and continues, you start to not only be balancing, who you're playing as, winning the rights, and who you're letting free, but also balancing that with how they're going to contribute to what just becomes the plan. And as the game continues, the people in the Commonwealth start to kind of figure out what's going on, and it all starts to take this sort of darker and darker tone, because you're essentially taking part in a revolution, which is awesome.
I really liked how they played that into the lore with the scribes, because it takes a while to sort of spin out, okay, what is the deal with the scribes, and how does that how does this ancient history, or these basically gods, relate to the current situation? But the Commonwealth was preceded by an empire that's really sounded like a kind of an basically evil empire. And the Commonwealth was formed when these scribes, who are all people who got exiled to the downside, created the rites and basically gave up their freedom to start sending people back to the Commonwealth. And the Commonwealth was essentially founded in the name of the scribes. I don't think the scribes themselves founded it, because I think that they had to stay in the downside. It was a little unclear. All this stuff is sort of told through, verse-like, legends. But long story short, this revolution that you're taking part in is a kind of a mirror of this revolution that created the Commonwealth. But the Commonwealth, founded in the name of the scribes and everything, has fallen. They've outlawed reading, where obviously if it was founded by scribes, that doesn't sound like a founding principle, and it no longer sort of reflects the original
It was when they invented
vision.
the stamping press, which I thought was a neat detail. And so the character of Wulfred was exiled specifically for owning just such a press and making written words available to people
So-
teaching them to read.
There's something about like in fantasy games, like feeling the need to come up with another word for things that we have a word for. So, like a stamping press is somehow a fantasy version of a printing press. Like they've evolved to English, but not exactly.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. There's just a couple.
Well, you know
examples
what's
of it.
nice about it is anytime they have one of those weird fantasy terms, they kind of ease you into it by making it hypertext. So you can hover over the word stamping press the first time you see it and see like, oh, what is it? Oh, that's a printing press. Oh, they were out. Oh, and furthermore, they were outlawed by this king of the Commonwealth or whatever.
Yeah.
So you can they use that kind of thing as specifically as a way to deliver more background.
You know, we don't need to play by play every plot detail post spoiler break, but I did want to talk a little bit about how things kind of turned out in each of our games. You know, were there any characters that we met sort of post what we'd consider spoilers that we particularly liked, or you know, who did you choose to liberate? How did it work out for you guys?
Well, I think what's important too is to the fact that it becomes increasingly clear that not every one of your party is going to be freed. At the beginning of the game, it sounds like that's your goal, to get everyone free. And so it's like, great, I love all these characters.
First thing they do is they tell you as the reader, you're not getting free.
No, but everyone else, your goal is to get everyone free, and you're like, oh, great, I get to send everyone home. That sounds awesome. And then you kind of keep meeting more and more characters. It's like, oh man, I'm going to have to send all of these home. And then you kind of start thinking like, well, you have to have 3 in a match. So how's this going to work? And so, of course, they add in this fact that the rites are coming to an end. And ultimately, 3 people, that's yourself included, will not be liberated. Will have to stay back.
Yeah, and it's possible to have essentially none of your characters liberated. It's, you know, from 0 to so at least 3 of you will be staying behind. The way that I played, I sort of played to win, and so I sent all but a handful of the characters back. And I made those choices mostly kind of based on who I thought would be most used to the plan and which characters I thought sort of deserved it most, I guess. But
I just remembered that when they saved my life after I was dragged out of the river, that me and Rookie Greentail and Jodariel and Hedwyn said, we're all going back. And so I was like, try to get them back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I sent Hedwyn first, which was really sad for me because he was who I thought I was best at in the rites. But I also, this was like the first time in this game I was like, man, this game is making me feel like something that I wasn't expecting to feel in this game, which is I was like, Hedwyn was even kind of sad that he was going because he was like, I said I wouldn't leave until all of you had left, but I will go. You know, I was like, I thought Hedwyn would be the best first person for the plan. He's like the leader. You know, we need a strong force on the other side. So he's who did you guys send first?
I also sent Hedwyn first, and that was because at the time when it became a possibility, the character that I named May. That's a detail that I thought was really neat about this. By the way, there's that character who doesn't remember her own name. She's kind of off. She's moon.
Just rhymes with hay or something like that.
Yeah, and she says, "I know that my name rhymed with gray," and then it gives you a choice of about a dozen different options. And so, of course, I chose May because she has nightmare eyes, and so May for me, kind of, they do have a lot of differences in their play style. There's no 2 characters that are really alike, but May kind of slotted into the slot that Hedwyn would have occupied in my roster, and that worked out okay. And so I was able to send him back without, like, at that point you don't have a ton of characters.
Yeah, Hedwyn was one of the ones that I didn't send back.
Really?
And I didn't use Hedwyn that much. I actually wasn't really that interested in Hedwyn's character. But I liked his story in the end. He was the one I was going to try and send over last. So at the end of the story, well, I don't want to spoil the ending yet because we're going to talk about that. But
this is the spoiler break.
I tried to send Hedwyn back at the end, and then because I had one final slot and I wanted to get my A team out of the downside. But then at the twist at the end is you're finally offered a chance to go yourself, and I was like, nah, fuck this, I'm out. So
seriously,
that's funny.
Yeah. Oh man, I went the whole other way around. I sent what's his name? The guy who's sort of nominally the bad guy. Volfred. No, not Volfred.
No, Oralek or whatever.
Oralek. Yeah. I sent Oralek back.
Oh, did you?
I thought. Yeah, it just seemed like such a bummer. Like Oralek is kind of the bad guy, but there's no
kind of the
bad guys in this game.
It's really only the last 20% of the game does Oralek kind of come in,
and he's like his backstory is really, I thought, was really interesting. Like he won one of these rites and then got kind of shafted out of being able to go home, and so I just sort of felt like it's a choice between me sending the reader back or sending him back. And the other characters that I still had at the time were Tizo, Big Bertrude, and Volfred. And I was like, they can stay. So
that's funny. We were pretty close. My final decision, I had Sir Gilman. And I ended up sending him back. I was like, the reader can stay, and then I had Big Bertrude and Volfred stay as well.
Can I just sing the praises of Big Bertrude as a character? I absolutely loved Big Bertrude because when she first shows up, she seems like, bog-dwelling witch. She's basically a cliche, or she seems like this background character. And then when she joins your party, it's a bit of a surprise. And the more you interact with her, the more interesting she gets. She's really an interesting character, and she's super, super fun to play with. In the rites, she is a beast. There's this one talisman that you can get for her. It's the one that you get by completing her scribe trial, which is this whole other thing we haven't talked about and probably don't need to. But you get this talisman for her that lets her blast wave attack penetrate through walls, which means that she can basically sit where she's safe and take people out over this enormous area of the map if you buff it up. She's absolutely nuts.
Yeah, she was my replacement for Jodariel when I sent her back.
Yeah.
Jodariel is a great defensive character, and Bertrude is as well.
Yeah, I kept Jodariel for a long time, but Tizo was my go-to. Tizo was one of the last ones that I let through because Tizo could just fly over everyone and was super fast, and I buffed his bomb. But I want to talk about what endings you guys got, because Reagan, I feel like you and I might have been pretty close on our final outcome, but Shane, I think it sounds like you were more different than ours. So can you tell? So when you finally make the decision, you get a wall of text, or not a wall of text, but they tell you what happens in the Commonwealth. So
yeah.
I'm wondering
in mine,
what happened.
The plan is a success, but so the Commonwealth is overthrown, but it's a bloody battle, and the characters, you get an update on what has happened to all the characters afterwards, and you go back, and the reader sort of kind of fades into obscurity. The reader who you only really illustrate a little bit about that character's background. He just achieves whatever his end was, and I had gotten revenge on the Commonwealth, which was my goal all along. But for me, some of the characters that were enemies that came back were most interesting in the ending. One of the first. In my first Liberation match, I fought against Igneous, who is, I can't remember the team name, but he's a giant devil, similar to Jodariel, and he's held up as pretty much like the worst guy, as far as I could tell. But when he goes back, the letter you get about what he's doing is, he opened a bar, and he's, and when Jodariel goes back, she and him seem like they kind of take up with one another. They become very close friends because they're both these, they've been tainted by the downside. If you stay in the downside too long, you become a demon and you grow horns. And so they've kind of found companionship with one another. In the end, they became friends.
Yeah,
I love that sort of American Graffiti style ending of this, where every single character gets a bit of a blurb that says after the results of the game, here's what happened with this person, and it seems like there must be a ton of possible configurations for this, because each one of their stories references the others. You know, this character missed this other character that didn't make it out of the downside, but they, you know, interacted with this other character that did. That sort of thing.
It had to be an extreme set of like if this and that. I'd love to see the weave, like the web they had to weave for that, because it'll be like for me, you know, I let Ruki and Pamitha go, which Pamitha is a hilarious name, and
I love that.
they become really good friends, and you know, but Ruki misses this character.
The sisters Tamitha and Pamitha, who were both voiced by the same person.
Yeah, or like Tizo and Ruki or Tizo and Nay become good friends, and I chose Nay because it's almost They make a joke about Bay. It says Bay, and then like couldn't be, could it, or something like that. I love that ending. So you got a bloody resolution to the I got a pure peaceful ending. Like it, I think, I don't know, but I feel like I probably got what would be considered like the most good ending. Not objectively best, but like most good as far as like everyone pretty much had a great time.
I think what was your percentage of chance of success at the end?
I didn't see it before the whole thing happened, but I know before I let Sir Gilman go, I was at 84%, and I'm assuming Gilman...
mine only got up into the 70s.
Yeah, mine was 90 right at the end.
Okay. I don't know what Gilman added, but I'm assuming I was into the mid to high 90s. But it could be like a score, like if you're above 90, you got, you know, the good ending.
I sent basically everyone on the Nightwings, you know, your team, back to the Commonwealth, but my reader chose to stay, which I kind of liked. It sort of felt like the right way to do it, you know. And anyway, it had, I thought, just like a really lovely ending. That sort of description of, you know, that everyone recognized that this group was sort of the scribes come again, and that it was a bloodless coup, and it was just like a really nice, lovely ending to the stories for all of these characters, and even the ones who stay in the downside, even your opponents who you defeat and stay in the downside. You get a nice sort of description of how they lived out the rest of their lives. And the downside is not hell, you know? It's hard to live there, but it's not hell. And so these stories for all these characters, you know, who stayed, who don't leave the downside, are still sort of like, they're a little bittersweet, but you know, they're living their lives, and it's nice to sort of see that they all have not exactly a happy ending, but an ending that, you know, their story continues.
Yeah, that's ultimately why I made the decisions on what I did, is for who should stay. Like, it's like Big Bertrude, she's got a thriving business, so if anyone can survive down there, it's her. And then Volfred, it felt right. Like, he's the one who planned all this. Like, it almost made more sense that he should have to stay back, win or lose, and
he
like
says
let everyone
that he doesn't want to go.
Right.
Point, so. And
then also Reader, I had stay back, and pretty much, and so I didn't lose any of the Liberation ones, so everyone else got to go back.
I had very few slots at the end because I'd lost once and I threw once because Pamitha, the harpy, asks you to throw so her sister can leave, and I was like, all right, everybody gets one. Because at that point I didn't know how the slots were limited.
Yeah,
I was like, all right, we'll send Pamitha. But
that was a tough one for me, man. I almost did throw that match too, but you had played a little farther than me at that point and had told me over Slack that you had done that, and so I was just sort of curious to see how it would play out differently if she didn't make it back. And now I kind of wish that I had, because, like, I don't know, it would have been nice to see those sisters reunited at the end of the story.
Oh, they weren't reunited. Pamitha stayed behind.
Oh, bummer.
Wow.
Dang.
Yeah.
So I have to tell you something though too, because I did not have that happen. One thing we haven't talked about is there's like a scoreboard basically, and you can kind of, whoever's at the top besides the Nightwings, which is your team, they get to play in the Liberation Rite, and you can kind of game it a little bit by choosing, if you don't want to play someone in the Liberation Rite, you try to beat them in a normal rite so they lose standing. And knowing that decision would come up, anytime I could play the Essence, which is Tamitha's team, I would play them to keep them low on the scoreboard, so they never had a shot at liberation. So I kept playing other people for it. So I never even had them like asking for their for Pamitha to ask for Tamitha to be made free. So I didn't have to be put in that situation.
I'm sure there's a lot of events that I missed because of that sort of thing. Different elements that maybe for me, certain teams just never made it into a liberation rite, and I'm sure there's details that I would have really enjoyed seeing if they had. I just really like that about it, though. It's so varied.
Did you guys free Rookie of his debts?
I don't know.
So
I sent him back to the Commonwealth
because I think this is an example of that. I had Rookie on my team, and I played the Dissidents, which was another team of all dogs, but they're bad dogs. And Rookie owed Barker, who was the main guy of that one, owed money to him.
Best music in the game.
Yeah. No, Manfree is the best music. But you can challenge. Rookie challenges him double or nothing. If you win this right, you'll get, Rookie will be freed of his debts, but if you lose it, double. And so it adds this, I was so stressed for Rookie. I picked, I was trying to level up someone. I'm like, nope, for this one, I'm picking my A team. I picked only the ones I was good at. And so I think you would only get that. I had to choose to play the Dissidents. In the back half of the game, you pick one of, 3 people to play. So if I hadn't picked them, that would have never happened. And Rookie gets, +2 hope permanently if you do it.
Nice.
And there's the other one with Big Bertrude, where if you play the witches, the withdrawn, I think they are the other team of crones. If you do that one and you turn on the glory star or whatever it's called,
the one that relates to their god that they worship.
Yeah, and if you beat them, that witch takes -5 hope forever. Which I'm assuming happens. I beat them. I'm assuming if you lose, the same thing happens to Bertrude, which is brutal.
Yeah, and I beat that too, and then faced them again later in a liberation rite, and that made a big difference. That's their heavy hitter, and that was a tough fight in the liberation rite. Mm-hmm. But we won, I think, just barely because earlier in the game we'd shown them that their god was dead.
Oh yeah, so that happened
Guys,
to me
I
at
think
the near end.
This is probably as much story as we really want to throw out there.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of room to be surprised.
So much good stuff.
But I am going to tell you what I'm going to do, and that is I am going to replay this game, and I'm going to throw a shit ton of matches. I'm just going to turn it up as high as I can in terms of the difficulty, and just get trashed and see if I can get 1 or 2 people home. And just see what the really bad is.
I can't, man. The game is so altered by everything. I can't imagine what happens if you lose every single match. But they have to have it set up they have to have a solution. You don't replay anything. So there has to be something that happens. And I'm sure it's not great. Nobody goes home and the plan probably fails. I wonder if you even get very far into the discussion of the plan. I could see it going totally other where he's just like, you guys need to get good at the rites before we even talk about the plan.
Worst Nightwings ever.
Yeah, this was
a failure.
He's like, here's how it's going to work. You send me back.
Just win one, damn it, please.
Well, I am so glad that we talked about this game and that we played it. This is a great game. And it took about 10 hours. We usually try to do this before the spoiler break, and I forgot this time. But the game took about 10 hours to play for me, although I think you could take a bit longer or maybe a bit faster if you skipped some of the dialogue. I'd say you could complete the game in probably under 6 if you really steamrolled through and skipped a bunch of dialogue.
But what's the point?
But yeah, don't do that. It is available on the PlayStation 4 and on Windows, Mac, and Linux on Steam. It's also... Huzzah! I was going to say it's on itch, but no, I'm thinking of Tacoma. It's just on Steam and probably also, I don't know, the Humble Store, that sort of thing. But it's $19.99 and well worth it. This game I loved it.
Yeah, we try not to talk too much about price because it's not super relevant. But when you are looking for value, I mean, this game has it all, and $20 is nothing.
Yeah, and perhaps more value, if we want to think about it in that sense, than most other games in this sort of zone, because of that sort of infinitely replayable versus mode. If you get really into this game, as I did, I mean, Shane, when I come down to visit you and little Ty,
1v1.
Yeah, we're gonna 1v1 it all over.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know. I want to come down.
Really good trash talk. You got to keep working on that.
I want to come down to hang out with you guys, not to hang out with you guys, but just to play Pyre against you, to put it to the test.
Let's give it a shot over share play. I'd be willing to see how this goes, because controlling just one character, I think it'll probably work on PS4 share play.
Yeah, it might. I hope they add online play, although it seemed from an interview that I saw that wasn't really on their agenda. They said, maybe if the game is like a massive success and everyone clamors demanding it, I really hope. I hope that, but I think we're probably not going to see this get. He said that he thought that bad online play was worse than no online play, something that I kind of agree with, I think. So
I don't know. Nintendo has been pulling off bad online play for 15 years now, so
that's true. Man, don't even get me started on Splatoon 2, which is a great game, but so much trouble with just any of the basic online play functions that you expect from a modern console in 2017.
I'm calling friend codes. I'm calling now the next big esport is the rites in Pyre.
Yeah, that'd be rad. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode of The Short Game. Next time, we're going to be talking about Tacoma, which I'm already about halfway through. It's not a long game. I'd say, 3-ish hours, but I've just started it last night and haven't had time to finish it yet. But I can already tell that it's another great game. This is from Fulbright, the folks who made Gone Home. Gone Home was the topic of the very first episode of The Short Game. Maybe don't go back and listen to that episode of The Short Game. We were still finding our legs, but do play Gone Home if you haven't.
Disagree.
And
go through our whole...
Hey, it was a decent episode.
We got
sound quality
128
was
episodes.
Weird. Yeah, and absolutely join us next week to talk about Tacoma. If you have a suggestion for a game that you think is short and great, let us know. Easiest way to do that is go to our website, www.theshortgame.net, where you can find our contact form, or you can email us at info@theshortgame.net. You can contact us on Twitter. We're pretty active there at _shortgame. And you can also find me on Twitter. I'm at RayganK. That's RayGanK. Nate, where can people find you?
On Twitter at NateSTL.
And Shane, where can people find you?
Also on Twitter at 8BitShane.
And Laura left us at the spoiler break, but she's at Laura J. Nash. Thank you, Laura. And thank you, listeners, for joining us on this episode of The Short Game.